Richard Hale looked at the boy in seat 14. C saw the pilot's manual resting on his knees and laughed out loud so the whole cabin could hear him. "Someone put a coloring book in that kid's hands and told him it was aviation," he said, swirling his champagne. "Sweetheart, planes like this aren't for boys like you. Go back to dreaming." 200 people heard it. Not one of them said a word. Before we go further, take 1 second and subscribe to the channel and follow Ethan's story all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from right now, because I truly love seeing how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The boy did not look up right away. Ethan Carter kept his eyes on the page in front of him on the diagram of a Boeing throttle quadrant that he had traced by hand 100 times, and he let the man's words pass over him the way his grandmother had taught him to let cruelty pass like weather, like something that would move on if you refused to feed it. "Did you hear me, son?" Richard Hale said louder now, leaning across the aisle from his first-class seat where the curtain had been pulled halfway back. "I'm talking to you. That's a professional flight manual. You know what that is? That's for real pilots, men who earned it." Beside Ethan, an old woman stirred. Evelyn Carter was 79 years old, and she had buried a husband and a son. And she had learned that there were battles worth fighting, and battles that only made you smaller. She put her thin hand over her grandson's forearm, and she squeezed once gently the way she had squeezed it when he was 6 and crying at his father's funeral. "Don't," she whispered. "Not here. Not for him." Ethan turned a page. The paper was soft at the corner from being touched so many times. Richard Hale did not like being ignored. He was a man who had spent 30 years never being ignored, a man who ran a shipping empire out of Atlanta, and who believed in the deepest part of himself that the world was divided into people who mattered and people who served, and that he could tell which was which by looking. He looked at the 18-year-old in economy in the cheap seat and the worn jacket, and he made his ruling. "You know what your problem is," Richard said to the cabin at large, gesturing with his glass. "Kids today think they can be anything. Anything at all. Nobody tells them the truth anymore. Somebody's got to." He smiled at the woman beside him in first class, a woman he did not know, expecting her to smile back. She looked out the window instead. A flight attendant came down the aisle then. Megan Collins was 34, 11 years into the job, and she had a sense for trouble the way sailors have a sense for a change in the wind. She had heard the laughter from the galley, heard the tone of it, and she had come to see. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, looking first at Ethan, then at the old woman, then at the man leaning across the curtain. "Everything's fine," Richard said, waving her off. "I'm educating the youth." "Sir, I'm going to ask you to keep your seatbelt fastened," Megan said in the flat professional voice they train you to use. "We may have some turbulence ahead." "I've flown more miles than you've been alive," Richard said. "Don't lecture me about turbulence." Megan looked at Ethan. "Are you okay?" she asked him quietly. For the first time, Ethan lifted his eyes, and Megan Collins felt something she could not explain, a small cold feeling at the back of her neck, because the boy's eyes were not the eyes of a boy. They were calm in a way that was almost unnerving. Calm the way still water is calm right before it drops off the edge of something. "I'm fine, ma'am," Ethan said. His voice was low and even. "Thank you for asking." She lingered a moment longer than she needed to. Then she moved on down the aisle, but she carried that feeling with her, and it did not leave. Evelyn watched the flight attendant go. Then she leaned close to her grandson, and she spoke so only he could hear. "You have your father in you," she said, "every ounce, and your father never once needed to prove himself to a man like that." Ethan almost smiled, almost. "I know, Grandma." "Do you?" she said. "Because I watched your daddy walk past 100 Richard Hales in his life, men who told him a black man had no business in a cockpit. And you know what he did? He flew the plane anyway," Ethan said. He had heard this story more times than he could count. He never got tired of it. "He flew the plane anyway," Evelyn repeated, and her eyes were wet now and proud. "And when that engine blew over the ocean and everyone else froze, your daddy brought 180 souls home, and he gave his own life doing it. Nobody laughed at Captain Marcus Carter then." The name hung in the small space between them. Marcus Carter, Ethan's father, dead 11 years and still somehow the most present person in the boy's life. Richard Hale had gone back to his champagne satisfied that he had won something. But the woman across from Evelyn, a middle-aged schoolteacher named Denise, who had been listening the whole time, leaned forward. "I'm sorry about him," she said softly. "You shouldn't have to hear that. Nobody should." Evelyn nodded, gracious as always. "He's not the first," she said. "He won't be the last. But my grandson is going to be a captain someday. You watch." "I believe it," Denise said, and she meant it. Up in first class, Richard Hale was already forgetting them. He had a merger to think about, a phone call to make the second they landed a rival he intended to crush. He signaled for another drink and thought about how good it would feel to sleep in his own bed in London tonight. He had no idea, no possible idea, that in less than 3 hours he would be on his knees in the aisle begging the boy he had mocked to save his life. But that is getting ahead of the story. For now, the plane climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, and the seatbelt light clicked off, and the great machine settled into the long, smooth middle of a transatlantic crossing. 200 passengers, 8 crew, 2 pilots up front behind a locked door. And somewhere over the darkening Atlantic, the ordinary hours passed one after another, the way they always do until they don't. Ethan opened his backpack and took out a second notebook, this one thicker filled edge to edge with his own handwriting. Approach speeds, emergency checklists. The V speeds for a 787 memorized and rewritten until the numbers lived in his hands. He had gotten his private pilot license 4 months ago, the youngest student his flight school had ever certified. His instructor, a gruff old former Navy man named Deke, had shaken his hand and said, "Kid, I've taught 400 students. You're not like the others. You fly like you were born knowing." And Ethan had gone home and cried alone in the bathroom because that was exactly what people used to say about his father. He was not a commercial pilot. He was not rated for a jet this size. He had never touched the controls of anything with more than one engine. But he had done something most people never do. He had studied this exact aircraft, this exact model, obsessively for years, the way a boy studies the thing he loves most in the world, because it was the last thing his father had flown before the airline moved Marcus up to a bigger fleet, and because every hour Ethan spent inside those manuals was an hour spent close to a man he could barely remember, but could not stop loving. "You still reading that?" Evelyn asked, half asleep. "Always," Ethan said. She smiled with her eyes closed. "Your daddy would fall over laughing to see you. You've got his stubbornness." "You mean your stubbornness," Ethan said, and the old woman chuckled a dry, warm sound and let herself drift off. An hour passed, then another. Somewhere over the middle of the ocean, where the water below was 3 miles down and black as the inside of a fist, the first sign of trouble came and almost nobody noticed it. The plane dipped, just slightly. A stomach lurch, the kind you feel a dozen times on a long flight. A few passengers looked up from their screens. The seatbelt light flickered on. Megan Collins in the galley reached out and steadied herself against the counter without thinking about it. But Ethan noticed something else. He noticed the sound. He had spent so many hours listening to engine recordings, to cockpit audio, to the specific mechanical language of this aircraft that his ear had become an instrument. And what he heard now under the ordinary drone was a small wrongness, a hesitation in the pitch, a half second where the plane seemed to ask a question and not get an answer. He sat up straight. "What is it?" Evelyn murmured, waking. "Nothing," Ethan said. But he was not looking at her. He was looking toward the front of the plane, toward the sealed cockpit door, and his whole body had gone very still. In the galley, the interphone buzzed. Megan picked it up, expecting the captain's voice asking for coffee. Instead, she heard something that made the blood leave her face. A cough, a wet, choking, terrible cough. And then a voice, the first officer's voice, thick and slurred and wrong. "Megan," the first officer said, "get up here. Something's wrong. Captain's, he's not responding, and I can't see straight. The line went dead. Megan Collins had trained for this. Every flight attendant trains for this. For the nightmare scenario for the day, the front of the plane goes silent. But no amount of training prepares you for the moment it is actually happening, for the specific cold horror of realizing that the 2 people flying the aircraft you are standing inside may no longer be able to fly it. She moved fast. She grabbed the second flight attendant, a young man named Carlos, and she said low and urgent, "Cockpit, now." Bring the medical kit." They went forward together. Megan keyed the emergency access code into the panel beside the door, the code they are given for exactly this, and the lock released with a heavy clunk, and she pushed the door open and she saw it. The captain was slumped sideways in his seat, his face gray, his hand pressed to his chest, unconscious or worse. And the first officer, the man who had just spoken to her, was slumped forward against his straps, his eyes half open and rolling. His skin flushed a strange deep red, gasping like a fish pulled up from deep water. And there was a smell. A sharp chemical bite in the air, something acrid and wrong coming from somewhere behind the instrument panel. "Oh, God," Carlos whispered. "Oh, God, oh, God." "Get it together," Megan snapped, but her own hands were shaking. "Help me with the captain. Carlos, now." The plane dipped again harder this time, and a warning tone began to sound, a low, insistent chime that neither of them knew how to silence. Somewhere behind them in the cabin, a passenger screamed. Because here is the thing about a plane on autopilot. It can hold a heading. It can hold an altitude. It can fly a straight line across an ocean with nobody touching the controls. But it cannot decide anything. It cannot climb around a storm. It cannot answer a radio. It cannot land. And when something goes wrong, when the machine begins to fight itself, autopilot does not save you. It simply flies you calmly and precisely straight into the disaster until a human being takes control. And the only two human beings on that plane who knew how to take control were dying in their seats. Megan and Carlos dragged the captain out of his seat and into the small space behind the cockpit. Megan pressed her fingers to his throat. There was a pulse, weak and fluttering, but there. "Heart," she said. "It's his heart. Carlos, the defibrillator, get it now." Then she went back for the first officer, and the smell hit her again, that chemical stench, and her own head began to swim. And she understood in a flash of terror that whatever was poisoning the pilots was going to poison her too if she stayed in that seat. She got the first officer out, barely. He was heavier than the captain, and he could not help her at all. His limbs loose and useless, and she and Carlos hauled him back into the galley and laid him on the floor. And she thought, we cannot leave those bodies up there. But we cannot go back in there either, and there is no one to fly this plane. There is no one to fly this plane. The chime kept sounding. The plane dipped and yawed. And that was when Megan Collins did the only thing she could think to do. She grabbed the cabin intercom and she keyed it, and she spoke to 200 terrified passengers in the steadiest voice she could force out of her body. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your flight attendant. We have a medical emergency involving the flight crew. I need to ask immediately if there is anyone on board this aircraft, anyone at all who has any experience flying an airplane, any experience. Please, if you can fly, we need you now." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. 200 people looked at each other, looked at the strangers around them, looked at the oxygen masks that had just dropped from the ceiling like pale yellow flowers of doom, and every single one of them thought someone else. Someone else will stand. There is always someone. A pilot. A veteran. Someone. No one stood. Evelyn Carter felt her grandson's hand slide out from under hers. "Ethan," she whispered. "Ethan, no." He was already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Ethan, you can't. Baby, you can't. It's too big. You've never—" "Grandma." He turned to her, and his eyes were his father's eyes, and his voice was so gentle it broke her heart. "There's nobody else. You'll die," she said, and the tears were pouring down her old face now. "I already lost your father to that ocean. I can't lose you to it too. I can't." Ethan took her face in both his hands. "You didn't lose Dad," he said. "He chose to stay in that seat because there were people who needed him more than we did. And I understand that now. I understand it completely, because I'm about to do the same thing, and it's the only thing that's ever made sense to me in my whole life." And he stood up. He stood up in the middle of a panicking cabin, an 18-year-old black kid in a worn jacket, and he said in a voice that carried all the way to the front of the plane, "I can fly this plane." For a moment, nobody understood. And then heads turned, and then a low murmur went through the cabin, disbelief and hope and fear, all tangled together. And then Richard Hale stood up too. He came out of first class past the curtain, and he planted himself in the aisle directly in front of the boy, and his face was twisted with something that was almost like rage, because even now, even with death filling the cabin, some part of Richard Hale could not stand the sight of this particular boy claiming this particular power. "Absolutely not," Richard said. Sit down right now, this is insane." "Sir, please get out of my way," Ethan said. "You," Richard's voice climbed, "you're going to fly a Dreamliner, a kid from economy who was reading a coloring book an hour ago. Are you people out of your minds?" He turned to the cabin, appealing to them, to the frightened faces. "This is a child. He'll kill every one of us. He'll fly us straight into the water. I will not let some kid get us all killed because a flight attendant panicked. Get out of his way." It was Denise, the schoolteacher, on her feet now. "Get out of his way, you horrible man." "Do you have a better idea?" a voice called from the back. "Are you a pilot?" another voice shouted at Richard. "Are you? Then shut up and let him try." Megan Collins pushed her way down the aisle. She looked at Ethan, and she remembered the strange calm in his eyes an hour ago, and she remembered the honor wall she had seen in the training facility once with the photographs of the airline's fallen heroes, and one name she had half noticed and forgotten. Carter. Captain Marcus Carter. "What's your name?" she asked him. "Ethan Carter." Megan's breath caught. "Carter," she said. Is your father?" "Captain Marcus Carter," Ethan said. "He flew for this airline. He died 11 years ago over the Atlantic, saving 180 passengers." He looked at her steadily. "I've studied this exact aircraft since I was 10 years old. I have a pilot's license. I know I'm not rated for this. I know exactly how insane this sounds. But I am telling you, ma'am, I can do this, and I am the only person on this airplane who can, and every second we stand here arguing is a second we don't have." Megan Collins made the decision that would define the rest of her life. She stepped aside. "Move," she said to Richard Hale. "You cannot be serious. Move," she roared in a voice nobody had heard from her before, and Richard Hale, for the first time in 30 years, was so shocked that he actually stepped back. Ethan walked forward. He walked down the length of the cabin, past the frightened faces, past the crying children and the praying grandmothers, and the businessmen gripping their armrests, and every one of them watched him go. This quiet boy. They had ignored this boy. Some of them had heard being mocked and had said nothing to defend, and now they were putting their lives in his hands, and the shame of it and the hope of it filled the cabin all at once. He reached the cockpit. He looked at the two pilots on the galley floor, the captain gray and still, the first officer gasping. He crouched beside them for 1 second, checked their pulses. The way the manuals had taught him confirmed what he already knew. "They're alive," he said to Megan. "Both of them, but I can't help them. I have to fly, keep them breathing, keep those bodies out of the cockpit, and whatever that smell is, we need to figure out where it's coming from, because it'll take me down too." "How do you know all this?" Carlos whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He stepped into the cockpit. And the moment he crossed that threshold, something changed in him. The frightened teenager fell away, and in his place was something older, something his father had left inside him without either of them ever knowing it. He looked at the two empty seats. He looked at the wall of instruments, the screens, the glowing panels, the yoke, the throttles, the whole impossible complexity of the machine, and he did not feel fear. He felt of all things a strange, terrible calm, the same calm his grandmother had seen in his eyes an hour ago, the calm of a boy who has finally arrived at the exact place he was always meant to be. He sat down in the captain's seat, his father's seat. He pulled on the headset. He looked at the smell coming from behind the panel. Isolated, it saw the small, dark stain where something had leaked and begun to burn, and he reached out and shut off the affected system exactly the way the checklist described, and the acrid smell began slowly to fade. First problem, solved. Then he keyed the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Ethan said, and his voice did not shake. "This is Atlantic Horizon Flight 1062. Both flight crew are incapacitated. I repeat, both pilots are down. I am a passenger with a private pilot license, and I have taken the controls. I need immediate assistance. Does anyone hear me?" For a long, sickening moment, there was only static. And then a voice came back. A man's voice, controlled professional, the voice of someone who had trained his whole career for the worst day and now realized the worst day had come. Flight 1062, this is Shanwick Oceanic Control. My name is Nathan Shaw. I hear you loud and clear. Say again you are a passenger and both pilots are incapacitated. Affirmative, Ethan said. Captain suffered what looks like a cardiac event. First officer was overcome by toxic fumes in the cockpit. I've isolated the source of the fumes. Both pilots are alive and being cared for in the galley. I am currently in the captain's seat. The aircraft is on autopilot at flight level 350. There was a pause. On the other end of that radio, thousands of miles away in a dim control room, Nathan Shaw closed his eyes for 1 second and prayed because he could hear how young the voice was. Understood, 1062, Nathan said. You're doing great. I need to ask you some questions so I know exactly what we're working with. What is your name and what are your qualifications? My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 18 years old. I hold a private pilot certificate, single-engine land. I have approximately 220 hours of flight time. Ethan swallowed. And I have studied the systems of the Boeing 787 in detail for 8 years. I know I'm not type-rated. I know what that means. But I know this aircraft, sir. I know it better than most people alive. Another pause. Then Nathan Shaw said something that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. Carter, Nathan said slowly. Any relation to Captain Marcus Carter? Ethan's hands tightened on the yoke. He was my father. And in that control room, Nathan Shaw felt the hair rise on his arms because he had been a young controller 11 years ago. And he had been on duty the night Captain Marcus Carter brought a crippled jet down out of the sky and saved 180 people and did not survive it. And he had heard the man's voice on the radio in his final minutes, calm and steady and unafraid. And now, 11 years later, over the same black ocean, he was hearing that voice again. Son, Nathan said quietly, your father was one of the finest pilots I ever had the honor of talking down. I was there that night. I heard him. He steadied himself. If you've got even a piece of what he had, we're going to bring this airplane home together. You understand me? We are going to bring it home. Yes, sir, Ethan said, and for the first time his voice trembled just slightly, just once. Thank you, sir. Behind him in the doorway, Megan Collins had heard all of it. She had her hand pressed to her mouth and tears were running down her face, and she thought we are going to live, this boy is going to save us. And then she thought about the man who had mocked him, and a cold anger went through her. But there was no time for anger, because the aircraft chose that moment to remind everyone that it was still in trouble. A new warning chimed, a screen flickered, and the plane began very slowly, almost gently to bank to the left, drifting off its heading, because the autopilot had encountered something it could not resolve and had begun to disconnect. 1062, be advised. Nathan's voice came sharp. We're tracking a large convective weather system building directly along your route to London. A major storm, Ethan. It's climbing fast and it's wide. You're going to be making some decisions in the next hour that I need you ready for. Ethan looked out through the windscreen at the darkness ahead at the horizon, where far away he could just begin to see the flicker of lightning inside towering black clouds. Understood, he said. First things first, Nathan said. That autopilot is about to hand the airplane to you whether you like it or not. I need you to put your hands on the controls and get the feel of her. Nice and easy. You are not going to overcorrect. You are going to hold her steady. Can you do that for me? Ethan placed his hands on the yoke. He felt the living weight of the aircraft come through it, the faint tremor of 100 tons of metal and fuel and human souls moving through the thin cold air at 500 miles an hour. I've got her, he said. And at that exact moment, the autopilot disconnected with a loud warble, and the full weight of Flight 1062 dropped into the hands of an 18-year-old boy, and the plane lurched, and somewhere in the cabin a woman screamed, and Ethan Carter took the first real breath of the rest of his life and began gently to fly. He held her level. His hands were steady. The plane wanted to wallow, wanted to drift, and he corrected it the way he had practiced 10,000 times in his mind. Small inputs, patience feel before force, and slowly the wings came level, and the nose settled, and the altitude held. That's it, Nathan breathed. That's it, Ethan. That's beautiful. You're flying an airliner, son. You're doing it. I'm doing it, Ethan repeated, half in disbelief, and behind him, Megan let out a sob of relief. But out in the cabin, Richard Hale was not relieved. Richard Hale was standing in the aisle with his fists clenched, watching the cockpit door, and inside him something ugly and desperate was building. He could not accept it. He could not accept that his life, his important, expensive, powerful life, now depended entirely on a boy he had decided was worthless. It offended something so deep in him that it was almost physical. "This is madness," he said to the passengers around him. "You've all lost your minds. There has to be a real pilot. Someone, a flight attendant can be trained. Someone competent should be in there. Not a, sit down," Denise, the school teacher, said. "For the love of God, sit down and be quiet. That boy is saving your life." "He is going to get us killed," Richard hissed. "And when he does, I want it on record that I said so." "Nobody cares what you said," said a large man 2 rows back, a construction worker named Gus, who had had just about enough. "Sit down before I sit you down." Richard sat, but his eyes never left the cockpit door, and his mind was already working, already looking for a way to take back control, and that hunger in him was going to cause a great deal of trouble before this flight was over. Inside the cockpit, Ethan was settling in. Now that the plane was stable, he could think. He ran his eyes over the instruments, orienting himself, comparing what he saw to the endless diagrams burned into his memory. Fuel, altitude, airspeed, heading, systems. He talked to himself under his breath as he went the way his instructor Deke had taught him, naming each thing, keeping his mind ordered. "Fuel's good. We've got range. Altitude holding at 350. Airspeed's nominal. Both engines running clean." He let out a breath. Okay, we're okay." "Talk to me, Ethan," Nathan said. "What are you seeing?" "Both engines nominal. Fuel state is good, plenty of range. I've isolated the fume source, it's not spreading. The 2 pilots are stable in the galley. I've got the aircraft in hand." Ethan paused. "The only thing I can't do anything about is that storm." "Let's deal with that now," Nathan said. "Ethan, I'm going to be straight with you because your father would have wanted me to be straight with you. That storm system is bad. It's one of the worst I've seen build this fast in years. Your original route takes you directly through the heart of it, and I am not going to send you into the heart of it because that would tear this airplane apart. So you have 2 options, and I need you to hear both." "Go ahead," Ethan said. "Option 1, we turn you around right now and we bring you back toward North America. It adds hours. Your fuel gets tight, but it's manageable. It's the safe choice. It's the choice I would tell almost any pilot to make." "And option 2, Nathan hesitated. "Option 2 is a corridor. There's a gap opening on the southern edge of the storm, a narrow band of survivable air between 2 cells. If you thread it exactly right, it takes you through and out the other side and puts you back on course for London, and you land before your fuel or those pilots run out of time. But it is narrow, Ethan. It is extreme turbulence, and it is close to weather that could kill you, and if you drift even a little, there is no room for error. None." The cockpit was silent, except for the hum of the engines. "You said the safe choice would add hours," Ethan said slowly. "How are those 2 pilots doing on hours? How's the captain's heart doing on hours?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "You're asking the right question," he said. "The captain needs a hospital as fast as humanly possible. Every hour you add is an hour his heart doesn't have. Same for whatever poisoned your first officer." Ethan looked out at the storm. He looked at the lightning stitching through the black towers of cloud ahead. He thought about his father, who had once told him in one of the few conversations he could actually remember, a pilot's job isn't to avoid every risk. It's to know which risk is worth taking, and then to take it without flinching. "We take the corridor," Ethan said. "Ethan, you said it yourself. Every hour costs those men their lives. My father didn't turn around when it got hard. I'm not going to either." Ethan's jaw set. "Talk me through it. I'm ready." And Nathan Shaw, 3,000 miles away, looked at the storm on his radar screen and looked at the blip that was Flight 1062 and made a silent promise to a dead man that he would bring his son home. "All right," Nathan said. "All right, Captain Carter, let's fly." He did not call him son that time. He called him Captain. And Ethan heard it, and something in his chest went tight and hot, and he gripped the controls a little firmer, and he pointed the nose of the aircraft toward the narrow gap in the storm. Back in the cabin, Megan had made her way down the aisle to check on the passengers, and to check in particular on the old woman in seat 14D, who she now knew was the pilot's grandmother. Evelyn Carter was sitting very straight, her hands folded in her lap, her lips moving in silent prayer. When Megan crouched beside her, the old woman opened her eyes. "Is he all right?" Evelyn asked. "My grandson. Is he all right in there?" "He's more than all right," Megan said, and she was crying again, and she didn't care. "Ma'am, he's flying this airplane like he was born to it. There's a controller on the radio who knew his father. He said Ethan flies just like Captain Marcus." Evelyn Carter put her hand over her heart. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, Marcus, do you see him? Do you see our boy?" And she wept. But it was not fear now. It was something else entirely. Something like the moment the sun comes up. "His father," Megan said gently. "What happened to him? Ethan told me, but my son gave his life so that other people's children could grow up," Evelyn said. 180 of them, and the world called him a hero for 1 week, and then it forgot him, and it went right back to looking at boys like my Ethan, the way that man up front looked at him tonight." Her old eyes flashed. "Like they're nothing. Like they don't belong. And now every single person on this airplane owes their life to the grandson of the man they forgot." Megan had no words. She took the old woman's hand and held it. And at that moment, from the front of the plane came the first hard jolt. The aircraft hit the outer edge of the storm's turbulence, and it dropped sickeningly 100 feet in an instant, and the whole cabin cried out, and bags fell from the overhead bins, and Megan grabbed the armrest to keep from being thrown to the floor. Inside the cockpit, Ethan felt the airplane buck under his hands like a living thing, and he heard Nathan's voice in his ear, steady as a heartbeat. "Here we go, Ethan. This is the beginning of it. Keep your wings level. Ride it. Don't fight her, fly her. You are doing exactly right. Steady, steady." Ethan's knuckles were pale on the yoke. Ahead of him, the lightning was closer now, close enough to light up the cockpit in flashes of blue-white, and the narrow corridor Nathan had promised was somewhere in that violence, a thread of survivable air between two walls of death, and he was going to have to fly through it by feel and faith, and the voice of a stranger who had loved his father. "I'm with you," Nathan said. "Every second. I'm right here." "Copy," Ethan said, and his voice was steady, and his father's steadiness was in it, and the plane plunged forward into the storm. Out in the cabin, the lights flickered. A child began to cry. Denise, the schoolteacher, reached across the aisle and took the hand of a stranger, and the stranger held on. Gus, the construction worker, bowed his head. And Richard Hale, gripping his armrest white with terror, stared at the cockpit door and felt for the first time in his adult life completely and utterly powerless. His money, useless. His name, useless. His contempt, useless. His entire life reduced to this single, unbearable fact, that his survival now rested entirely in the hands of an 18-year-old black boy he had spat on with his words, and that if that boy failed, they would all die together, the mocker and the mocked, in the same black water. He did not know yet that the boy would not fail. He did not know yet that before the night was over, he would crawl up that aisle on his hands and knees. But Ethan knew none of that either. Ethan knew only the airplane and the storm and the voice in his ear and the weight of 200 lives, and somewhere underneath all of it, quiet and warm and unshakable, the presence of a father who had shown him without ever meaning to exactly how a Carter behaves when everything is on the line. The turbulence slammed into the aircraft again harder, and a warning light bloomed red on the panel, and Nathan's voice sharpened. "Ethan, watch your altitude. You're getting pushed down. Bring her back. Easy, easy." Ethan brought her back. The storm closed around Flight 106, two like a fist, and 200 people who 3 hours ago had watched a rich man mock a poor boy and had said nothing at all, now held their breath and prayed with everything in them that the boy they had failed would not fail them. He gripped the controls, he set his jaw, and into the heart of the thing, steady and unafraid, Ethan Carter flew. The first wall of the storm hit them like a fist closing, and Flight 1062 dropped so hard that Megan Collins was thrown into the galley wall and heard something in the cabin behind her shatter. She grabbed the interphone strap and held on with both hands, and through the cockpit door, she could hear the boy's voice low and steady, talking to the airplane the way a man talks to a frightened horse. Easy, easy. I've got you. I've got you. Inside the cockpit, Ethan Carter was fighting for control of 100 tons of metal in air that had gone insane. The yoke bucked in his hands. The altimeter spun. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to grab the controls and wrench them to force the airplane to behave, and he did the hardest thing a young pilot ever learns to do. He loosened his grip. He let the airplane move. He flew it with his fingertips instead of his fists. "That's it," Nathan Shaw said in his ear 3,000 miles away, and closer than his own heartbeat. "That's exactly it. You feel her wanting to climb, let her climb a little. Don't fight the mountain, ride the mountain." "Riding it," Ethan breathed. "How's your altitude?" "Down 400 feet, coming back. 350 holding." Ethan wiped sweat out of his eyes with his shoulder because he would not take a hand off the yoke. "There's a downdraft on the left side. It keeps pulling the wing." "Anticipate it," Nathan said. "You know it's coming now. Lead it. Beat it to the punch." And Ethan did. The next time the left wing dropped, he was already correcting, already there ahead of the storm, and the airplane leveled cleaner, and for one instant the ride smoothed, and he almost laughed out loud with relief. Then a lightning strike lit up the entire cockpit, white, and a crack of thunder hit the fuselage so hard that back in the cabin 30 people screamed at once, and a woman in row 22 began sobbing that they were all going to die, and the panic that had been held back by a thread started to break loose. Megan felt it happen. She felt the fear turn from 100 separate frightened people into one single frightened animal. And she knew that if she did not stop it right now, it would consume the whole cabin, and a stampede of terror could kill them just as surely as the storm. She keyed the intercom. She made her voice into something it did not feel. "Everyone listen to me. Listen to my voice." The cabin quieted just slightly. "The young man flying this airplane is the son of a decorated airline captain. He has trained for this his entire life. There is an air traffic controller on the radio guiding him every second, a man who has landed emergency flights for 20 years. We are not alone up here, and we are not helpless. What I need from every one of you is to stay in your seats, keep your belts fastened, and let that young man do his job. Can you do that for me? Can you do that for him?" For a moment, there was only the roar of the storm. Then Gus, the construction worker, the big man from 2 rows back, stood up in the shaking aisle holding the seat backs to stay upright, and he turned to face the cabin, and he said in a voice like gravel, "You heard the lady? That kid's got more guts than all of us put together. So we sit down, we shut up, and we let him fly. Anybody got a problem with that?" Nobody did. The sobbing quieted to sniffles. The animal fear pulled back just enough. But not everyone had heard Megan's voice as comfort. In seat 2, a Richard Hale had heard it as confirmation of the nightmare. A child at the controls, a stranger on a radio. His life, his empire, his future, all of it hanging on the competence of a teenager from economy. And in the twisted logic of a man who had never once in his life not been in control of a situation, Richard began to construct a certainty. The boy was going to fail. The boy was going to kill them all. And the only chance any of them had was for someone competent, someone important, someone like Richard Hale to take charge before it was too late. It was madness, but terror makes its own logic, and Richard Hale's terror had found a target. He unbuckled his seatbelt. The woman beside him grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" "Sit down," the attendant said. "I'm going to fix this," Richard said, and there was something wrong in his eyes now, something feverish. "Somebody has to." Up in the cockpit, none of them knew what was building behind them. Ethan was threading the corridor, the narrow band of survivable air, and Nathan was calling out the turns. "Come right 2 degrees, just 2. There's a cell building on your left, and I want you away from it. Good. Hold that." "Holding." "You're doing beautifully, Ethan. You're halfway through the worst of it. I can see the far edge on my radar. There's calm air on the other side. You just have to hold it together for a few more minutes." "A few more minutes," Ethan repeated, and he let himself believe it. And that was when the engine failed. It did not fail quietly. It failed with a bang that shook the entire airframe, a deep percussive thud from the left wing, and instantly a cascade of warnings bloomed across the panel. Red lights, a blaring alarm, a mechanical voice announcing the emergency in its flat, inhuman calm. The airplane yawed hard to the left, dragged by the sudden dead weight of a stopped engine, and Ethan's whole body slammed against his straps. "Engine," he shouted. "Nathan, I've got an engine failure left. Engine, I've got fire warning on number 1, in the control room." Nathan Shaw's stomach dropped through the floor. An engine fire in a storm at night over the ocean with a private pilot at the controls. It was the exact nightmare. It was almost the same nightmare that had killed this boy's father. But Nathan Shaw had learned something 11 years ago, listening to Marcus Carter die. He had learned that the worst thing you can do in that moment is let the pilot hear your fear. "Okay," Nathan said, and his voice was iron. "Okay, Ethan. This is a bad one, but it is survivable, and I am going to walk you through every step. Are you with me?" The airplane was slewing sideways, the good engine on the right dragging them into a turn, the storm hammering them, the fire warning screaming. Ethan was stamping on the right rudder with everything his leg had, holding the nose straight through, sheer muscle, and sweat was pouring down his face. And for one terrible second, the 18-year-old under the pilot almost broke through, almost cried out, "This is too much, I can't, I'm just a kid." And then he heard as clearly as if she were sitting beside him, his grandmother's voice from an hour ago. "You have your father in you, every ounce." He set his jaw. "I'm with you," Ethan said. "Talk me through the fire, now." "Left engine fire, we shut it down and we kill the fire," Nathan said. "Confirm your thrust lever number 1, bring it to idle, then cut off. Slow and sure. Don't touch number 2. Number 2 is your life. Number 1, idle." Ethan's hand moved. He identified the correct lever, the way he had 1,000 times in his memory, verified it twice, because to pull the wrong one now would kill everyone, and he brought it back to idle. Idle confirmed. Cut off. Cut off. The dead engine spooled down completely. Now the fire handle. Number 1. Pull it. Ethan found the fire handle, gripped it, and pulled. There was a mechanical resistance, and then it came, and somewhere in the wing, a bottle of suppressant discharged into the burning engine. For a moment, nothing happened. The fire warning kept screaming. Ethan held his breath. Behind him in the doorway, Megan held hers. Then the warning stopped. The light went dark. "Fire's out," Ethan gasped. "Fire is out. Nathan," the warning cleared. "Yes." Nathan actually shouted it, then caught himself. "Yes, good. That's the fire handled. Now we've got a bigger problem, and I need you calm. You are flying on one engine. You have lost half your power. This airplane can fly on one engine, Ethan. It is designed to. I promise you it can, but she is going to want to descend, and she is going to want to yaw, and you are going to have to work every second to keep her honest. Can you do that?" "I'm already doing it," Ethan said through gritted teeth, his right leg trembling from holding the rudder. My legs shaking. How long do I have to hold this?" "Rudder trim," Nathan said. "We're going to trim out that pressure so your leg gets a rest. Find your rudder trim. I'll walk you to it." And step by step in the middle of a storm on one engine, Nathan Shaw taught an 18-year-old boy to trim out the yaw of a crippled airliner, and slowly the killing pressure came off Ethan's leg, and the airplane settled into a new and wounded kind of stability, flying sideways to the wind, losing altitude slowly, but flying. 3,000 feet lost, Ethan reported. "We're at 320 now, descending about 500 a minute." "That's normal for single engine. Don't panic about the altitude. We have plenty," Nathan said. "You are through the worst of the fire, and you have a stable airplane." Ethan, listen to me. You just handled an engine fire in a thunderstorm. Do you understand what you just did? There are type-rated captains with 20,000 hours who would be proud of what you just did." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed up, because in the reflection of the dark windscreen, for one instant in the flash of lightning, he thought he saw his father's face looking back at him, and he knew it was just his own reflection, he knew it, but he let himself believe it for 1 second because he needed it. He needed his father right then more than he had needed anything in 11 years. "I hear you," he finally managed. "Thank you. Give me the next step." And that was the exact moment the cockpit door burst open behind him. Richard Hale had made it up the aisle. He had waited until Megan turned to check the cabin, and he had lunged past her, and now he was standing in the cockpit doorway, wild-eyed, his expensive shirt soaked with sweat, staring at the back of the boy's head, with the desperation of a drowning man. "Get up," Richard said. "Get out of that seat. You've lost an engine, I heard it. We're going down. You've killed us. Get up and let me call someone. Let me get a real—" "Sir, get back." Megan was on him, grabbing his arm, but Richard was bigger and half mad with fear, and he shook her off, and he took a step into the cockpit toward the controls, toward the boy who was the only thing keeping 200 people alive. "Don't touch anything," Ethan shouted, not turning around, because he could not turn around, because his hands and feet were the only things holding the airplane in the sky. "Whatever you do, do not touch me, and do not touch these controls. We are on one engine, and if you jolt me right now, you will kill everyone on this plane. Do you understand me?" But Richard wasn't hearing words anymore. He was reaching for the boy's shoulder, reaching to pull him bodily out of the seat, and in half a second his hand was going to close on Ethan's arm, and the airplane was going to lurch, and the fragile thing Ethan was holding together was going to shatter. It did not happen because Gus, the construction worker, had followed him up the aisle. Gus came through the door low and hard, and he wrapped both of his enormous arms around Richard Hale from behind, and he lifted the CEO clean off his feet, and he hauled him backward out of the cockpit as Richard kicked and screamed. "You do not touch that kid," Gus growled in his ear. "You do not touch that kid, you hear me? Let go of me. Do you know who I am? I will end you. I will end every one of you. That boy is going to... That boy is flying this plane," Gus said, dragging him back down the aisle. "And you're going to sit down and buckle up, and if you get out of that seat one more time, I swear to God I will hog-tie you with these seatbelts and let you ride out the landing on the floor. You understand me, Nod, if you understand me." Richard Hale, dangling in the grip of a man twice his strength, looked into the faces of the passengers around him, and he saw no allies there, not one, only disgust and fear and fury, and something in him finally cracked. Not into humility, not yet, into a kind of stunned, trembling silence. Gus dropped him into his seat and stood over him with his arms crossed, and Richard did not move again. Megan pulled the cockpit door shut and braced her back against it and looked at Ethan at the sweat pouring off him, at his hands locked on the controls, and she said shakily, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry he got past me. Are you? Is the plane—" "The plane's fine," Ethan said. His voice was strange, flat, focused down to a single point. "Please don't let anyone else in here, no matter what. Please." "Nobody else gets in," Megan promised. "I've got the door. I'm not moving." 1062, what is happening up there? Nathan's voice sharp with alarm. "I heard shouting." "A passenger tried to pull me out of the seat," Ethan said. "It's handled. We're okay. Give me the next step." There was a long pause on the radio. When Nathan spoke again, his voice had changed. It was quieter, and there was something in it that had not been there before, something like awe. "Ethan," Nathan said. "In 26 years of doing this job, I have never talked to a pilot who could keep his voice that steady while a man was trying to rip him out of his seat in the middle of an engine fire." A breath. "You are not flying like a student's son. I've been sitting here trying to find the words for it, and there aren't any. You fly like your father. You fly like a captain. And in the cockpit, alone with the storm and the dead engine and the 200 lives in his hands, 18-year-old Ethan Carter finally let a single tear run down his face, and he did not wipe it away because both of his hands were busy keeping everyone alive. "Let's get out of this storm," he said, his voice thick. "Get me to the calm air, then get me to London." "Copy that, Captain," Nathan said. "Come right 5 degrees. The edge of the weather is 11 miles ahead. You are almost through. Hold her steady and fly." Ethan flew, and minute by minute, mile by mile, the crippled airplane clawed its way toward the edge of the storm. The turbulence which had been trying to tear them apart began to ease the great blows, spacing out, growing softer, until finally, with a suddenness that took Ethan's breath away, the airplane burst out of the black towers of cloud and into clear night air, and above them, impossibly, there were stars. The cabin felt it. The instant the ride went smooth, a wave of relief moved through 200 people, so powerful it was almost a physical thing. And here and there someone laughed, a shaky, disbelieving laugh, and someone else cried, and a man near the back started to clap, and then stopped, embarrassed because they weren't down yet, they weren't safe yet, but for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they were not being thrown around inside a nightmare. "We're through," Ethan said, and his voice broke on the words. "Nathan, we're through the storm. I've got stars. I've got clear air." "I see it on my scope," Nathan said, and his own voice was unsteady now. "You did it. You brought a single-engine airliner through a convective storm system at night. Ethan, I want you to hear me. That was one of the finest pieces of flying I have ever witnessed, and I have witnessed a lot. Your father is—" He stopped. He started again. "Your father would be so proud of you that he wouldn't be able to speak. I can barely speak myself." Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. And in the darkness behind his eyes, he was 10 years old again at a funeral, holding his grandmother's hand, watching them fold a flag. Not understanding, only knowing that his father was gone into the ocean and was never coming back. And he opened his eyes, and he was in his father's seat over that same ocean. And he understood at last that the distance between those two moments was the whole story of his life. "Okay," he said, steadying himself. "Okay, what's next? Get me to the ground." "Now we plan the landing," Nathan said, "and I'm not going to lie to you because you've earned the truth. The landing is going to be the hardest part. You're on one engine, which changes everything about your approach. And the weather at Heathrow—" He paused, checking his data, and Ethan heard him exhale slowly. "The weather at Heathrow is not good, Ethan. There's a crosswind, a strong one, gusting well beyond what's comfortable even for an experienced crew in a healthy airplane." "How strong?" "Strong enough that I have to ask you a serious question, and I need you to think about it before you answer." Nathan's voice was gentle now. "There are other airports. Alternates I could send you to where the wind might be kinder, but every one of them costs you time and fuel and takes those 2 pilots further from a hospital, and none of them is guaranteed to be better by the time you get there. Or you press on to Heathrow where the medical teams are already staged, where they're waiting for you, but where you will have to put a single-engine airliner down in a crosswind that would test a veteran captain." A pause. "I can't make that choice for you. It's yours." And in the back of the cabin, though, Ethan couldn't know it. Evelyn Carter had her eyes shut and her lips moving, and she was not praying for God to make the flight easy. She was praying for God to make her grandson brave, because she knew the way only a mother who has buried a hero can know that the men in her family did not turn back. In the cockpit, Ethan Carter looked out at the stars and then down at the dark ocean, far below the ocean that had taken his father. And he thought about 180 people 11 years ago who had gone home to their families because one man refused to give up. And he thought about the 2 dying pilots in the galley behind him who did not have hours to spare, and he made his choice. And when he spoke, his voice did not waver at all. "My father didn't turn back," Ethan said. "Not once, not ever. He flew into the worst of it because there were people who needed him to. And there are people on this airplane who need me to do the same thing right now." He set his jaw. "We're going to Heathrow, wind and all. Talk me down." Nathan Shaw was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally answered, there was something in his voice that sounded almost like a man saluting. "Copy that," he said softly. "Heathrow it is. Vectors for the approach coming up. And Ethan, one more thing before we start." "Go ahead." "Whatever happens in the next 20 minutes," Nathan said, "I need you to know that talking to your father 11 years ago was one of the great honors of my life, and talking to you tonight is the other one. Now let's go home, son. Let's finish this." Ethan gripped the controls of his father's airplane and pointed the nose toward London, and the wounded jet flew on through the clear, cold night toward the storm-lashed runway where 200 lives would be decided all at once in the space of a single landing. The wounded jet flew on toward London with 1 engine dead and 1 engine holding, and for a few minutes the air was smooth and the stars were out and Ethan Carter let himself breathe. But he had learned something tonight that his father must have known his whole career, which was that the moments of calm are the most dangerous ones, because that is when the mind wants to relax. And a pilot who relaxes is a pilot who misses the next thing coming. So Ethan did not relax. He ran his eyes across the panel again and again, naming everything under his breath, and it was on the third pass that he caught it. "Nathan," he said, "my fuel. Something's wrong with my fuel." In the control room, Nathan Shaw sat up straight. "Talk to me. What are you seeing?" "I'm burning more than I should be. A lot more. And it's not balanced." Ethan stared at the gauges, his mind racing through the diagrams burned into his memory. "The left tank is dropping faster than the right. That doesn't make sense. The left engine is shut down. It shouldn't be." And then it hit him and his stomach turned over. "It's a leak. Nathan, I think I've got a fuel leak on the left side. That engine didn't just fail. Something in there tore open." There was a silence on the radio that lasted exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, Nathan Shaw did a piece of mental arithmetic that made his blood run cold. A fuel leak, on a single engine flight, with a landing that was already going to be at the absolute edge of possible. "Okay," Nathan said, and Ethan could hear the effort it took to keep his voice level. "Okay, new situation. I need your fuel numbers. Read me both tanks' exact figures right now." Ethan read them. Nathan wrote them down and did the math and did it again to be sure, and the answer both times was the same. It was going to be close. Not comfortable close. The kind of close where you land on fumes and you do not get a second try because there will be nothing left to go around with. "Here's where we are," Nathan said, and he had decided in that instant to give the boy the whole truth because the boy had earned it, and because a half-truth now could kill him. "You have a fuel leak on your dead side. I don't know how bad it is, and neither do you, and there is no way to stop it from where you're sitting. You have enough fuel to reach Heathrow, but you have exactly one approach in you. There is no going around. There is no second attempt. Whatever happens on that first approach, you have to land the airplane, because if you have to climb away and come back, you will run out of fuel before you do. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Ethan understood. He understood it completely. One engine, a crosswind that would frighten a veteran, and now one single approach, one chance, land it or die. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm sorry," Nathan said. "I'm sorry to put that on you." "Don't be." Ethan surprised himself with how calm the words came out. "You didn't put it on me. The airplane did. My job is to fly the airplane." He paused, and something his father used to say floated up out of the deep water of his memory, something he hadn't thought of in years. "My dad used to tell me, you don't get to choose the emergency. You only get to choose whether you're ready for it. I'm ready. Let's do this right." Behind him, Megan Collins was still braced against the cockpit door, and she had heard every word, and her legs had gone weak under her because she understood now that the thing was even worse than she had feared. One chance. She thought about the 200 people behind her, about the children, about the old woman praying in 14D, and she thought, if this boy misses, we are all gone, and there is nothing any of us can do but sit in our seats and trust him. And then she thought strangely that she did trust him completely. This boy she had met 3 hours ago, and she did not fully understand why, except that some people are simply built to be trusted, and you know it the moment you see them under pressure. "Ethan," she said through the door, "whatever you need from back here, anything, you tell me and it's done. I need the cabin secured for the hardest landing of their lives," Ethan said without turning. "I need everyone belted, everything stowed, and I need them braced. And Megan," his voice caught for a second, "if this goes wrong, if I don't, if we hit hard, I need you to be ready to get those doors open and get everyone out. You're the crew now. You're the one who saves them if I can't." Megan swallowed hard. "You're going to save them," she said. "But I'll be ready. I promise you I'll be ready." She turned and moved into the cabin to do her job, and Ethan was alone again with the airplane and the voice in his ear. "Vectors for Heathrow," Nathan said. "I'm going to bring you around on a long straight approach so you have all the time in the world to get set up. Turn left heading 090. Begin your descent to 10,000 feet. Left to 090, down to 10,000, Ethan repeated, and he began the long descent toward London. Out in the cabin, Megan moved down the aisle row by row, checking belts, stowing bags, and everywhere she went, she carried a calm she did not feel because that was the job. She reached Evelyn Carter's row, and the old woman caught her wrist with a grip that was startlingly strong. "Tell me the truth," Evelyn said, her old eyes fierce. "Not the version you tell the others. The truth. How bad is it?" Megan hesitated, and then she decided that this woman, of all the people on the airplane, deserved the truth. "It's very bad," she said quietly. "One engine, a hard crosswind, and now we can only make one attempt at the landing." She saw the old woman absorb it, and she added softly, "But ma'am, your grandson is flying like I have never seen anyone fly. The controller on the radio has been guiding pilots for 26 years, and he keeps saying he's never seen anything like Ethan. If anyone alive can put this airplane down, it's your boy. I believe that with everything in me." Evelyn Carter closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were dry, and there was something in them that was almost peace. "His father used to say something," Evelyn murmured. "He'd say, the Carters don't fly for the easy days. Anybody can fly on an easy day. We fly for the day the sky tries to kill everybody, because that's the day people need us." A tear finally slipped down her cheek. "My son died on a day like that. And now his boy is up there on a day like that. And do you know what, honey, I'm not afraid. Isn't that strange? I should be terrified. But I'm not. Because I know exactly who's flying this airplane. I raised the man who raised him." Megan couldn't speak. She squeezed the old woman's hand and moved on. She had almost reached the front of the cabin when Richard Hale spoke. He had been silent since Gus dropped him in his seat, silent and gray and small, and Megan had almost forgotten him. But now he spoke, and his voice was different. The bluster was gone. The contempt was gone. What was left was something raw. "Is it true?" Richard asked. "What you told the old woman? One landing, one chance." Megan looked at him coldly. "Yes." Richard was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his own hands, at the expensive watch on his wrist, at the manicured nails, and something moved across his face that Megan had not thought him capable of. "I mocked him," Richard said very low. "Before any of this, when he was just a kid reading a book. I told him planes weren't for boys like him. I spilled my drink on his notes, and I laughed about it." He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet, and it was horrible to see, because it was so clearly unfamiliar to him, this feeling, whatever it was. "And now he's the only reason I'm going to see the morning. If I see the morning—" Megan did not comfort him. She was not ready to, and she was not sure she ever would be. "Then I suggest," she said, "that if you do see the morning, you spend the rest of your life becoming a person who deserves what that boy is doing for you right now." And she walked away, leaving Richard Hale alone with the first honest feeling he had had in longer than he could remember. In the cockpit, the descent was going well, and then without warning, it wasn't. "Nathan," Ethan's voice was tight. "My hydraulics. I'm getting a caution on hydraulic system, the left one. Is that the leak? Is the leak taking out my hydraulics?" Nathan's mind raced. The left engine drove the left hydraulic system. With the engine dead, that system was already running on backup, and if the leak had damaged more than just fuel lines, if there was structural damage in that wing, then Ethan could lose hydraulic power to the very controls he needed for landing. "How's your control response?" Nathan asked. "Move the yoke gently. Tell me she still answers." Ethan tested at his heart in his throat. The airplane responded, but there was a heaviness to it now, a sluggishness that hadn't been there before. "She answers," he said, "but she's heavy. She's fighting me more than she was." "You've got backup systems, and they're doing their job," Nathan said. "The airplane is designed with layers of redundancy for exactly this. You will have control authority for the landing, but she's going to feel heavy, and you're going to have to be strong on the controls, stronger than before, especially in that crosswind. Are your arms good? Is your strength good?" Ethan thought about the fact that he was 18 and not a large kid, and had been fighting this airplane for the better part of an hour, and his arms were already trembling with fatigue. "My strength is good." He lied, because it was the only acceptable answer. "Good man," Nathan said, and Ethan wondered if he knew it was a lie, and suspected that he did and loved him a little for pretending along with him. They came down through 10,000 feet, then 8, then 6. The lights of England appeared below a vast glittering carpet, stretching to the horizon, millions of people down there, living their ordinary evening, none of them knowing that a boy was fighting to keep 200 souls from falling out of their sky. 6,000 feet, Ethan reported. I've got the city. I can see it. You're doing great. Heathrow is 12 o'clock and 40 miles. I'm going to hand you off to the tower controllers there soon, but I'm not going anywhere, Ethan. I'll be on the line the whole way down. You are not losing me. Don't leave me, Ethan said, and for just a moment, the boy came through the pilot again, small and scared and 18. Please, whatever happens, don't leave me alone up here. I'm not leaving you, Nathan said, and his voice was fierce with it. I have been sitting in this chair for 6 hours past the end of my shift, and they could not drag me out of it with a truck. I am going to be in your ear until your wheels are stopped on that runway. You are not alone. You have never been alone tonight. Do you hear me? I hear you, Ethan whispered, and then the storm at Heathrow announced itself. They came down into the weather and the smooth air ended, and the airplane began to shudder and roll as the crosswind found it, and Ethan felt the true force of what he was about to fly into. The wind was a living thing, shoving the airplane sideways, trying to twist it, trying to throw it off the invisible line that led to the runway. And he had to hold that line on one engine with heavy controls and trembling arms and one single chance. Wind check, came a new voice on the radio, crisp and British, the Heathrow Tower controller, who had been fully briefed and whose voice carried the particular calm of someone deliberately holding back their own alarm. Flight 1062 wind is 270 at 35, gusting 48, runway 27 right. You are cleared to land. Emergency services are standing by. 35, gusting 48. Ethan knew what those numbers meant. They were past the limit. They were past the limit for a normal landing with a full crew and 2 engines. And he was going to have to do it with half of that and 1 try. Copy cleared to land, Ethan said. And his voice was steady. And he did not know how it was steady, except that somewhere in the last hour, something had settled in him. Some final piece had clicked into place, and he was not flying as a scared kid anymore. He was flying as a Carter. Ethan, Nathan's voice low and urgent and full of everything he had. This is it. This is the whole thing right here the next 90 seconds. I need you to forget the storm 11 years ago. I need you to forget everything except the runway and my voice and your hands. Can you give me that? Can you give me 90 seconds of the best flying you have ever done in your life? Ethan looked out through the rain streaming across the windscreen, and far ahead through the murk he saw them. The runway lights. 2 parallel lines of light in the darkness reaching toward him, the narrow strip of earth where the whole night would end one way or the other. I see the runway, he said. Then fly to it, Nathan said. Fly to it, Captain. Bring them home. And in the cabin, 200 people who had felt the airplane begin to shake, who had heard the landing gear come down with a heavy thud, who could see nothing but knew everything, gripped their armrests and bowed their heads. Megan Collins strapped herself into the jump seat by the door and called out the brace command, and 200 people bent forward over their knees. Gus, the construction worker, prayed for the first time in 30 years. Denise, the schoolteacher, held the hand of the stranger beside her. Evelyn Carter sat upright and would not brace, would not bow, but kept her eyes open and fixed forward toward the cockpit where her grandson was, and she said out loud softly, "Fly, baby, fly the way your daddy taught you, without ever knowing he was teaching you. Fly." And Richard Hale, the man who had started this whole night with a cruel laugh, bowed his head lower than anyone and found that he was weeping and did not try to stop. The runway rushed up. The wind slammed the airplane sideways. Ethan Carter, 18 years old, the son of a hero. He barely remembered, held the controls of his father's airplane in his shaking hands, and with the voice of a stranger who loved his father, guiding him down through the dark. He began the last 90 seconds, the ones that would decide whether 200 people lived or died, and he did not flinch, and he did not turn back, because the Carters never did. The airplane sank toward the runway, and then at the worst possible instant, a gust hit it like a hammer from the side, and the whole aircraft skidded left off the center line, and Ethan felt his heart stop. "Drifting left," he shouted. "Nathan, I'm drifting off the line. Correct it, Don't chase it into the wind rudder and aileron. Crab it back easy, easy. Nathan's voice was a rope thrown across the dark. You have room. You have room, Ethan. Bring her back to the center line. You're doing it. Ethan worked the controls the way Nathan had drilled into him opposite inputs. The airplane crabbed sideways into the wind like a crab walking against a current. The nose pointed away from the runway, even as the aircraft tracked toward it, and slowly, agonizingly, the center line crept back under him. Back on the line, he gasped. I'm back on the line. Beautiful. Now hold it right there. But the airplane was not done fighting him. Every second, the wind tried something new, a shove, a drop, a twist, and every second Ethan answered it, and his arms were screaming now, burning the heavy controls, fighting him because half his hydraulics were gone, and sweat ran into his eyes, and he could not wipe it, and he blinked it away and kept flying. 500 feet, he called. I'm at 500. You're on speed. You're on glide path. You are doing everything right, Nathan said. Here's what happens now. Ethan and I need you to hear it before it comes. When you get close to the ground, the wind is going to try one more time. It always saves its worst for the last 100 feet. It's going to want to throw you at the very end. Do not let it surprise you. You know it's coming. Be ready for it. I'm ready, Ethan said, and he was and he wasn't, and there was no difference anymore between the two. Behind him through the door, Megan had her head down in the brace position, but her eyes were open, staring at the floor, counting her own heartbeats. And she was thinking about her mother, and about the fact that she had not called her mother in 3 weeks. And she promised God and the universe and anyone listening that if she lived through the next 30 seconds, she would call her mother every single day for the rest of her life. 400 feet. In seat 14D, Evelyn Carter had begun very quietly to sing. It was an old hymn, one she had sung at her son's funeral 11 years ago, one she had sung to Ethan when he was a baby, and the passengers around her heard it. The thin, cracked, beautiful voice of an old woman singing about grace in the last moments before a landing that might kill them all, and one by one they began to hum along the ones who knew it, and the sound moved through the cabin like something holy. 300 feet. Richard Hale heard the singing. He did not know the hymn. He had not been to church in 40 years. But he found that his lips were moving anyway, trying to shape sounds he didn't know, and the tears were pouring down his face, and he thought with a clarity that terrified him that he had spent his entire life being the kind of man who would mock a boy for holding a book, and that if he died in the next 10 seconds, that was the sum total of who he had been, a man who made other people smaller. And that it was not enough, it had never been enough, and he had understood it too late. 200 feet, Ethan called, and his voice was shaking now with the strain, with the effort of holding a wounded airliner steady against a wind that would not quit. Nathan, she's heavy. She's so heavy, my arms. I know, son. Just a few more seconds. You have given me everything, and I need just a little more. Hold her. 100 feet. And the wind saved its worst for last exactly as Nathan had promised. A massive gust slammed into the airplane from the right, and the right wing lifted, and the aircraft rolled, and for one horrifying fraction of a second, Flight 1062 tilted toward the ground with 200 souls aboard, the wingtip dropping toward the concrete, and in that fraction of a second everything hung in the balance. Every life, the whole night, the entire meaning of everything Ethan had done. And Ethan Carter did not think. There was no time to think. His hands moved on their own, moved with 11 years of study, and 200 hours of flight, and the blood of a hero in his veins. And he threw the controls hard against the gust, caught the falling wing, wrestled it back to level with a strength he did not know. He had a strength that came from somewhere deeper than muscle, and he held it, and the wings came level exactly as the wheels reached the runway. 50 feet, he breathed. 30, 20... Bring the power back, Nathan said softly. Gentle, let her settle. You're home, Ethan. You're home. Ethan eased the last of the power off the good engine, and the airplane sank the final few feet, and for one endless suspended moment, it floated hovering between the sky and the earth, between life and death, between the boy he had been 3 hours ago and the man he had become tonight. And then the wheels touched. They touched hard, a jolt that went through the whole airframe, but they were down. The tires were on the concrete of Heathrow, screaming, gripping, and the airplane was on the ground, and Ethan stamped on the brakes and hauled the controls and fought the crosswind that was still trying to shove them off the runway. Even now, even on the ground, and he kept it straight. He kept it on the center line through sheer will. The airplane thundering down the runway, slowing. In the cabin, no one breathed. The touchdown had thrown them forward against their belts, and now they felt the brakes, felt the deceleration, felt the airplane slowing, and still no one dared to believe it. No one dared to make a sound because they had been so certain they were going to die that their minds could not yet accept that they were not. The airplane slowed, and came finally to a stop. For 3 full seconds there was absolute silence on Flight 1062, and then it broke. It broke like a dam, like a flood, like nothing Megan Collins had ever heard in 11 years of flying. 200 people erupted at once, screaming, sobbing, cheering, laughing strangers, grabbing strangers, people who had not spoken a word to each other, all flight now clutching each other and weeping, and the sound of it filled the cabin and shook the walls, the sound of 200 human beings who had been given their lives back. In the cockpit, Ethan Carter sat very still. His hands were still on the controls. He could not seem to let go of them. His whole body was trembling, and the sweat was cold on his skin now, and he heard the cheering behind him as if from very far away, and he could not quite understand that it was over, that he had done it, that they were alive. Ethan! Nathan's voice, and it was breaking the iron control, finally gone 26 years of professional calm, dissolving all at once. Ethan, you're down. The wheels are stopped. You did it. You brought them home. All of them. Every single one. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, and no sound came out. He tried again. They're alive, he whispered. Everyone's alive. Everyone is alive, Nathan said. 200 passengers. Your 2 pilots are already going to the hospital, and because you got them there when you did, they have a chance. You did that. You, Ethan Carter, 18 years old. You did what most captains could not have done, and you did it on your first try, and there was never a second try to be had. A ragged breath. Son, I have been doing this job for a very long time, and I want you to hear me because I mean every word. That was the greatest thing I have ever been a part of, and I got to be a part of it twice now, once with your father and once with you. And that was when Ethan Carter finally let go of the controls and put his face in his hands and wept. He wept for the 200 people behind him who would go home to their families. He wept for the 2 pilots who would live. He wept for the terror he had held back for an hour so that he could do his job. But most of all, more than anything, he wept for his father, for Captain Marcus Carter, who had sat in a seat exactly like this one over an ocean. Exactly like this one 11 years ago, and had made the same choice Ethan had made tonight. The choice to fly toward the danger because there were people who needed him to. And Ethan understood now at last completely what his father had felt in those final moments. Not fear, not regret, something else. The deep and terrible peace of a man doing exactly what he was made to do. I understand now, Dad, Ethan whispered so quietly that even the radio didn't catch it. I finally understand. The cockpit door opened behind him. Megan Collins stood there, her uniform disheveled, her face streaked with tears, and she looked at the boy in the captain's seat. This boy she had watched save every life on the airplane, and she could not find a single word big enough, so she just put her hand on his shoulder. They want to see you, she said, her voice thick. All of them. They want to see the person who saved their lives. Ethan wiped his face with the back of his hand. He took off the headset, and he heard Nathan's voice one more time, small and tinny now coming from the earpiece as he lowered it. Go on, Captain, Nathan said. Go let them thank you. You earned every second of it. Ethan set the headset down gently on the console the way you set down something sacred. He looked one last time at the panel at the instruments that had trusted him at his father's seat that he was about to leave. And then he stood up on legs that could barely hold him, and he turned toward the cabin. and when he stepped through that cockpit door, 200 people rose to their feet. They rose all at once, the whole cabin standing, and the sound they made was not cheering anymore. It was something deeper, a roar of gratitude and disbelief and love for a stranger, and they were reaching for him, hands stretching out to touch him as he came down the aisle, wanting to make sure he was real, wanting to be able to say for the rest of their lives that they had touched the boy who saved them. And Ethan Carter walked down that aisle, the same aisle he had walked up an hour before as a mocked and dismissed kid from economy, and now every eye in the airplane was on him with reverence, and he was not the boy from economy anymore. He would never be that boy again. He passed Denise, the school teacher, who was sobbing, and could only say, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," over and over. He passed Gus, the construction worker, who did not say anything at all, who simply put his enormous hand over his own heart and bowed his head, one strong man honoring another. He passed row after row of faces he had saved, and he nodded to them, and he could not speak, and he kept walking because there was only one person he needed to reach. His grandmother was standing in the aisle at row 14, waiting for him. This tiny old woman who had buried her husband and her son, and had been so certain tonight that she would have to bury her grandson too. And when Ethan reached her, when he finally reached her, the last of his strength went out of him, and the man dissolved back into the boy, and he fell into her arms. "Grandma," he sobbed, and he was 10 years old again, he was 5, he was a baby, he was every age he had ever been all at once. "Grandma, I flew it. I flew Dad's plane. I flew it home." And Evelyn Carter held her grandson, this old woman whose arms should not have been strong enough to hold up a grown young man, but somehow were, and she pressed her face into his hair and she wept, and she said the only thing there was to say. "He was with you," she whispered fiercely. "Your daddy was with you every second up there. I felt him. I felt him in this cabin. He never left you, baby. He was in your hands the whole way down." She pulled back and took his wet face in her old hands and looked at him, and her eyes were blazing with a pride so total it was almost unbearable to see. "2 Carters have flown people home out of that ocean now. 2, and I got to raise them both." 10 rows away, Richard Hale watched this, and he did not move, and he did not speak. He watched the boy he had mocked weep in his grandmother's arms, while 200 people stood in tribute, and the full weight of what he was, of who he had been, came down on him like the whole sky. He had looked at that boy and seen nothing. He had looked at that boy and seen someone beneath him, someone who did not belong, someone to be laughed at. And that boy had just carried Richard's worthless, arrogant, undeserving life down through a storm on one engine and put it safely on the ground without ever once asking whether Richard deserved to be saved. Richard Hale sat back down in his seat alone, unnoticed, forgotten by everyone, which was exactly what he deserved and exactly what he had never once experienced in his life. And he put his face in his hands, and for the first time since he was a child, Richard Hale asked himself who he wanted to be and did not like a single part of the answer he had been living. The cabin door opened. The cold English night air rushed in along with the flashing lights of a dozen emergency vehicles, and a team of medics rushed aboard to reach the 2 pilots. And behind them came the airport officials and the airline representatives, and the first of what would become an army of people trying to understand what had just happened on Flight 1062. But for one more moment, before all of that swallowed them, before the world came rushing in with its questions and its cameras and its investigations, there was just an old woman and a boy standing in the aisle of an airplane holding each other alive together, with the ghost of a hero standing invisible beside them, and 200 people bearing witness to the truth that the world had tried so hard to teach them not to believe. That you never ever know who is sitting in seat 14C. The medics reached the 2 pilots first, and Ethan pulled himself out of his grandmother's arms and pushed forward through the crowd because he needed to know, he had to know whether the men he had fought so hard to save were going to make it. "The captain," Ethan said, catching the arm of the lead paramedic. "The captain had a cardiac event. It happened maybe an hour and 10 minutes ago, and the first officer was overcome by fumes. I isolated the source, but he breathed a lot of it. Please tell me they're going to be okay." The paramedic, a broad-shouldered woman with steady hands, looked at the boy gripping her arm, and something in his face made her stop and answer him honestly instead of brushing past. "You isolated the fume source?" she asked. You're the one who was flying." "Yes, ma'am. Please, the captain." She looked at the gray-faced man on the galley floor and her people already working on him, and she made a fast assessment. "The fact that he's still got a pulse after 70 minutes means somebody kept him alive back here," she said. "That gives him a real chance. And your first officer, if you cut off the fumes when you did, you may have kept him from permanent damage. I'm not going to promise you anything because I can't. But I'll tell you this, son. An hour ago, these two men were in a metal tube over the middle of the ocean with nobody to fly it. Right now, they're on the ground with a hospital 8 minutes away. Whatever you did up there, you gave them the only thing that mattered. You gave them time." Ethan nodded, and he stepped back, and he let them work, and he watched them lift the captain onto a stretcher, and he watched the man's hand slip off the edge of the stretcher and dangle, and one of the medics tucked it gently back. And Ethan thought about how that hand had been on these controls 3 hours ago. A professional hand, a captain's hand, and how tonight it had been Ethan's hands instead, and he had to look away because it was too much. Megan Collins appeared beside him. "They're taking the captain first," she said quietly. "The first officer's stable enough to wait 2 minutes. Ethan, the airline people are here, and there are—" She hesitated. "There are a lot of people who want to talk to you, officials, investigators, and I think there's press already at the gate. Word travels fast. A passenger landing a Dreamliner on one engine is not a thing that stays quiet." Ethan felt something cold move through him. He had not thought about any of that. He had not thought past the landing, because for the last hour there had been no past the landing, there had only been the next second and the one after it. And now suddenly there was an after, and it was rushing at him faster than the runway had, and he was so tired, so bone-deep exhausted that he could barely stand. "I don't know how to do any of that," he said. "I don't know how to talk to investigators or press, or I just wanted everyone to live. That's all I wanted." "I know," Megan said. "And that's exactly what you tell them. Nothing more, nothing fancy, just the truth. You wanted everyone to live." She put her hand on his arm. "And Ethan, listen to me. You don't face any of it alone. I was in this cabin the whole flight. I saw everything, every single thing that man in first class did, and everything you did. I will be standing right next to you for every word of it. You understand? You are not going to be some scared kid alone in a room full of officials. You'll have me, and you'll have me." It was Gus, the construction worker, who had come up behind them. And behind Gus was Denise, the schoolteacher, and behind her a dozen other passengers, and they were all looking at Ethan with the same fierce protectiveness, because this boy had saved their lives, and they were not about to let the world chew him up now that he had. "Whatever anybody tries to say about you," Gus said, "there's 200 witnesses on this plane who'll tell them the truth. You hear me? You've got 200 people in your corner for the rest of your life." Ethan looked at them, at these strangers who had become something more than strangers in the space of 3 hours, and his throat closed up again, and he could only nod. But not everyone on Flight 1062 was in Ethan's corner, because in the middle of all of it, in the chaos of medics and officials and weeping passengers, Richard Hale had begun quietly to think about himself. It was what he had always done. It was reflex deeper than character, the instinct of a man who had spent his whole life protecting one thing above all others, which was Richard Hale. And even now, even shaken, even having wept in his seat and asked himself terrible questions, the old machinery began to turn. Because Richard Hale was starting to understand that there had been witnesses, that 200 people had seen him mock the boy who saved them. That 200 people had seen him try to force his way into the cockpit during an engine fire. That 200 people had seen a construction worker haul him back to his seat like a misbehaving child. And Richard Hale understood with the cold clarity that had built his empire that this was a catastrophe for him, that if this story came out the way it had actually happened, he was finished. Socially, professionally, completely. So Richard Hale did what Richard Hale had always done when the truth threatened him. He began to build a different story. He straightened his ruined shirt. He wiped his face. And he composed his features into a mask of shaken dignity, the mask of a man who had been through an ordeal. And he began to move toward the front of the airplane, toward the officials, toward the boy. And as he moved, he began in a voice pitched to be overheard to construct his defense. "Thank God someone kept a level head up there," Richard said to no one and everyone loudly. "I did what I could to keep order back here. It was chaos. Pure chaos, people panicking. I tried to help the crew maintain calm. Megan Collins heard it. She turned and she saw exactly what he was doing, and a fury unlike anything she had ever felt rose up in her. "Excuse me," she said. Richard did not look at her. He kept moving toward the airport officials who were gathering at the front of the airplane clipboards, out radios crackling. "I have to say, as one of the more, let's say, experienced travelers on board," Richard said to them, extending his hand, "I did try to advise caution. When an untrained individual takes the controls of an aircraft, there are serious safety protocols to consider. I raised those concerns, perhaps too forcefully in the heat of the moment, but from a place of genuine concern for everyone's safety." The official, a Heathrow operations manager named Priya Chandra, shook his hand, automatically frowning, trying to place him in the flood of information she was receiving. "And you are?" "Richard Hale. Hale Global Logistics. I was seated in first class." He lowered his voice, "man to important man. Look, I'm sure the young man did his best. I'm sure his intentions were good, but there are going to be questions about how a minor without commercial certification came to be flying a passenger aircraft. And I think for everyone's protection, those questions need to be asked carefully. I'd be happy to provide a statement about the decision-making process that led to it." And there it was. The knife slipped in so smoothly that it almost sounded like concern. Richard Hale was going to reframe the entire night. He was going to make Ethan's heroism into a liability, a scandal, a boy who should not have been in that seat, and he was going to position himself as the responsible adult who had raised sensible objections. And to a stranger, to an official who had not been on the airplane, it might even work. It might even sound reasonable. Megan Collins felt the blood roaring in her ears. "Ms. Chandra." Megan stepped forward, and her voice was shaking, but it was loud and it was clear. "My name is Megan Collins. I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. I was in the cabin for the entire flight. And before you take one more word from this man, you need to know exactly what he did tonight." Richard's mask slipped just a fraction. "Now there's no need to—" "3 hours ago," Megan said over him, "before there was any emergency, before anyone was in danger, this man mocked that boy for reading a pilot's manual. He told him in front of dozens of passengers that planes weren't for boys like him. He spilled his drink on the boy's study notes and laughed about it." The operations manager's frown deepened. That's not relevant to the—" "It's completely relevant," Megan said, "because it tells you who this man is. But it's not the worst of it. When both of our pilots were incapacitated, when that boy was the only person on this airplane willing to try to save us, this man physically blocked him. Called him, and I quote, a dangerous kid from economy. Tried to keep him out of the cockpit while the airplane was flying itself toward a storm. And then Miss Chandra in the middle of an engine fire, with that boy holding a crippled airplane together with his bare hands. This man forced his way into the cockpit and tried to physically pull him out of the pilot's seat. He nearly killed all of us. He had to be dragged out and restrained by a passenger. Ahanin angiakami." The operations manager's face had gone very still. She turned to look at Richard Hale, and the automatic professional courtesy was gone from her eyes. "Is this true?" she asked. "It is a gross mischaracterization of a chaotic situation," Richard said smoothly, but there was sweat on his upper lip now. "I was concerned for safety. Anyone would have been. This flight attendant is emotional, understandably. We've all been through a terrible ordeal." "It's true." Gus stepped forward. "Every word. I'm the passenger who dragged him out. He was reaching for the kid's arm with the plane on one engine in a thunderstorm. I've got the scratches on my forearm where he fought me. You want to see them? It's true." Denise, the schoolteacher, was there now too. "I was sitting 3 rows behind him. I heard him mock that child before any of this happened. I heard everything." "It's true." Another voice, and another. Passengers were turning now, stepping into the aisle, and one after another. They were speaking up a rising chorus of witnesses, and Richard Hale watched his careful story collapse in real time. Watched 200 people who had every reason to hate him refuse to let him rewrite what they had all lived through together. "I saw him spill the drink. I heard what he said to that boy. He tried to open the cockpit door. My husband and I both saw it. He said the boy would get us all killed. He said it over and over. The operations manager held up a hand and the voices quieted, and she looked at Richard Hale with an expression of cold, professional distaste. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I think it would be best if you remained in your seat. Airport police will want to speak with you separately. Attempting to interfere with the operation of an aircraft during an in-flight emergency is a very serious matter. Very serious indeed." She turned to a uniformed officer who had just come aboard. "This gentleman is to be kept apart from the other passengers pending questioning." And Richard Hale, who had walked onto this airplane as one of the most powerful men in the room, was escorted to a seat and made to wait like a suspect, while all around him the boy he had mocked was being treated like what he was, which was a hero. The reversal was so total, so complete, that for a moment Richard could not even process it. He sat down heavily, and he looked at his hands, and he understood that everything he had spent his life building, his reputation, his invulnerability, his certainty that men like him always came out on top, had just ended in the aisle of an airplane, brought down by the testimony of the very people he had always considered beneath him. Ethan had watched the whole thing from a few feet away, too tired to intervene, and honestly, too stunned. And when it was over, when Richard had been led away, Ethan found that he did not feel triumphant. He did not feel vindicated. He mostly just felt sad, a strange gray sadness, because he had grown up with men like Richard Hale looking through him his whole life, and he knew that the man's downfall would not undo a single one of those looks, would not give back the notes that had been ruined, would not erase the exhaustion of always having to prove that he belonged. His grandmother found him again in the crowd, and she read his face the way she always could. "You're not happy about it," she said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what I feel, Grandma," Ethan admitted. He got what was coming to him. But I keep thinking if the pilots hadn't collapsed, if none of this had happened, he'd have gone home to London and never thought about me again, and he'd have been right. That's what gets me. In a world where the pilots don't collapse, he wins. He always wins. It took an impossible night for anyone to see it. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, and then she said something Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. "Baby," she said, "you're right. In most worlds, men like him win, and boys like you go unseen. That's the truth, and I won't lie to you about it. But here's what you learned tonight, and it's the most important thing your daddy ever knew." She took his hands. "You don't get ready for the impossible night because you think it's coming. You get ready because you decide a long time before it ever comes what kind of man you're going to be when it does. Your daddy spent his whole life getting ready for one night he prayed would never come. And you did the same thing in all those manuals and all those hours. And you didn't do it for glory because there was never supposed to be any glory. You did it because that's who you decided to be." Her eyes were fierce. And that man in first class, he spent his whole life getting ready to be exactly who he was tonight too. Small, cruel, frightened. We are all getting ready every single day for the night that tests us. You were ready. He wasn't. That's the whole story, and it's the only part of it that was ever in anybody's control. Ethan stared at his grandmother, and something eased in his chest, some knot he had been carrying, not just tonight, but for his whole life. "That's what Dad knew," he said quietly. "That's what your daddy knew," Evelyn agreed. "And now you know it too, and it can't ever be taken from you, not by any Richard Hale who ever lived." The first officer was carried past them, then on a stretcher, conscious, now his eyes fluttering open, and as he passed Ethan he reached out weakly and caught the boy's sleeve, and everyone stopped. "You," the first officer whispered. His voice was a wreck, ruined by the fumes. Are you the one who flew us down?" Ethan knelt beside the stretcher. "Yes, sir." The first officer stared up at him, at this exhausted teenager, and his eyes filled with tears. "I felt it," he rasped. "Right before I went under. I felt the airplane I knew we were. I knew there was nobody, and I thought, this is it. This is how it ends, all these people." He gripped Ethan's sleeve harder. "How old are you?" 18, sir." The first officer closed his eyes, and a tear ran down into his hair. 18, he whispered. "My God, my daughter is 18. He opened his eyes again. "Whoever taught you to fly, son, whoever they are, you tell them they saved 202 lives tonight because they taught you." And Ethan, kneeling in the aisle, said the truest thing he had ever said. "My father taught me," he said. Captain Marcus Carter. He flew for this airline. He died 11 years ago, saving 180 people over the Atlantic. He never got to teach me anything, not really. I was 7. But I spent my whole life studying everything he ever knew, everything he ever flew, trying to be close to him. His voice broke. So when you say whoever taught me saved these lives tonight, you're right. My dad taught me. He's been teaching me my whole life. And tonight, I finally got to fly with him. The cabin, which had been full of noise, went utterly silent. The medics stopped. The officials stopped. Megan Collins pressed her hand to her mouth, and the first officer lying on that stretcher looked up at the son of Marcus Carter, and he did something that no one who saw it would ever forget. With the last of his strength, he raised his trembling hand to his forehead and he saluted. "Captain Carter's boy," he whispered. "It would have been an honor to fly with your father, and it was an honor to be flown by his son." They carried him away, then out into the night toward the hospital, toward the life that Ethan had given back to him. And Ethan stayed kneeling in the aisle for a long moment. After he was gone, his head bowed, and no one disturbed him, because everyone understood that they were watching something sacred. A boy and his father's ghost together at last in the aisle of an airplane on the far side of an ocean that had tried to take them both and failed. When he finally stood, Priya Chandra, the operations manager, was waiting for him, and her whole manner had changed. She was looking at him now, not as a problem to be managed, but as something close to a miracle she had been privileged to witness. "Mr. Carter," she said, and it was the first time in his life anyone had called him that. "There are a great many people who need to speak with you tonight. Investigators, the airline, and yes, the press, who I'm afraid are already gathering. Under normal circumstances, I would tell you that you have to face all of that right now." She paused. "But these are not normal circumstances, and you are exhausted, and you have been through something no 18-year-old should ever go through. So I'm going to do something I'm not strictly supposed to do. I'm going to get you and your grandmother somewhere quiet and somewhere private, and I'm going to let you rest and eat something and sit down before anyone asks you a single question. Because you saved 200 lives on my watch tonight, and the very least this airport owes you is 1 hour of peace." Ethan looked at her and his eyes filled, because after a whole life of the world demanding that he prove himself, someone was simply unexpectedly being kind. "Thank you," he said. "No," Priya Chandra said quietly. "Thank you. My sister was on this flight." Her voice caught. "She's standing right over there because of you. So whatever you need Mr. Carter for, as long as I have anything to say about it, the answer is yes." And she led them off of the airplane, the boy and his grandmother, out through the door and into the flashing lights and the cold, clean English night, past the emergency vehicles and the growing crowd, and behind them, still aboard the aircraft, 200 passengers watched them go, and one by one, without anyone starting it, without any signal, they began again to applaud, and this time the applause followed Ethan Carter all the way up the jet bridge, a sound of pure gratitude rolling after him into the night, the sound of 200 lives saying thank you to the boy from seat 14C. The applause followed them up the jet bridge and into a quiet room somewhere in the terminal, and then at last the doors closed, and it was just the two of them, Ethan and his grandmother, in the sudden silence, and Ethan sat down in a plastic chair and put his head against the wall, and finally began to shake. Not from fear now. The fear was gone. It was the shaking that comes after when the body understands that it is safe and lets go of everything it was holding. And Evelyn Carter sat beside him and put her arm around him and did not say a word, because she had done this before. She had held her son like this years ago after his first emergency, a smaller one, an engine surge over Denver, when Marcus had come home and sat in the kitchen at 2 a.m. and shaken exactly like this. She knew that the only thing to do was to be there and to let it pass. "They almost died," Ethan whispered. "Grandma, they almost all died. If I'd pulled the wrong lever, if I'd panicked on the fire, if that gust had come 1 second earlier when we were lower, they'd all be gone, 200 people. And it was all just seconds. It was all just tiny little moments where it could have gone the other way." "But it didn't," Evelyn said softly, "because you didn't let it. I got lucky." "No." His grandmother's voice was firm. "You listen to me. I have heard pilots talk my whole life. I married one, I raised one, and every one of them says the same thing after the bad ones. They say they got lucky. And you know what your grandfather told me once? He said luck is what unprepared people call the things that prepared people earn. You didn't get lucky, Ethan. You spent 8 years getting ready for those seconds. When they came, you were ready. That's not luck. That's the opposite of luck. That's a lifetime of choosing. Ethan was quiet for a while, his shaking slowly easing. I keep hearing his voice, he finally said. Nathan, the controller. I keep hearing him say, "Bring them home, Captain." Nobody ever called me that before. Captain. He looked at his grandmother. I'm not, though. I'm not a captain. I'm a kid with a private license who happened to be on the right airplane on the worst night of everyone's life. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm still just me. Evelyn took his face in her hands the way she had on the airplane. Tomorrow you're going to wake up as the young man who saved 200 lives, she said. And nobody, not one soul on this earth is ever going to be able to take that away from you. Not Richard Hale, not the world that spent your whole life looking through you. You did a thing tonight that most people never do in 100 lifetimes. You looked death in the face for 200 strangers, and you did not blink. That's not just being you, baby. That's being the best of who you are. And that best was always in there. Tonight, the world just finally got to see it. There was a soft knock at the door. Megan Collins put her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said. I couldn't leave without seeing you before they start pulling everyone in different directions. She came in and knelt down in front of Ethan's chair, so they were eye to eye. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it, because I think you're the kind of person who won't let yourself believe it. Okay, Ethan said. I have been a flight attendant for 11 years, Megan said. I have worked through medical emergencies and engine problems, and one attempted diversion for a bomb threat that turned out to be nothing. I have seen how people behave when they think they might die, and I want you to understand something about what I saw tonight. Her voice thickened. I did not see a scared kid who got lucky. I watched you hear that a man was trying to rip you out of your seat during an engine fire, and I watched your voice stay so steady that the controller on the radio couldn't believe it was real. I watched you make a choice to fly into a storm because it gave 2 dying men a better chance. I watched you catch a wing that was falling toward the ground in the last 100 feet of the hardest landing I've ever been part of. She took his hands. That wasn't luck, and it wasn't just your father's training. Your father gave you the knowledge, but the steadiness, the courage, the refusal to break when everything was breaking, that was you, Ethan. That came from you. And I will spend the rest of my career telling people about the night an 18-year-old boy showed me what real courage looks like. Ethan couldn't speak. He just held her hands and nodded, and Megan squeezed once and stood. There's one more thing, she said. The controller, Nathan Shaw, he's on the phone. He tracked down this room and he called and he actually asked if he could speak to you before you got swept up in everything. I told him I'd ask. She held out a phone. Do you want to talk to him? Ethan took the phone like it was made of glass. He put it to his ear. Nathan. Ethan. And even through the phone, even with the emergency, long over the emotion in the man's voice, was raw. I had to hear your voice one more time. I had to know for myself that you're really standing there safe on the ground. Are you okay, son? I'm okay, Ethan said. I'm shaking a little, but I'm okay. Nathan, I don't know how to thank you. You didn't leave me. You said you wouldn't leave me, and you didn't. I couldn't have done any of it without your voice in my ear. Now you listen to me. Nathan's voice was fierce. I gave you words. That's all I did. I gave you words and you turned them into a landing. Do you understand the difference? I have talked a lot of pilots through emergencies. I have also talked pilots into the ground who could not do what I was telling them because knowing what to do and being able to do it are 2 completely different things. I gave the same words to your father 11 years ago, and he could not save himself because the airplane was too far gone, but he saved everyone else, and he did it with the same steadiness I heard in you tonight. Nathan's voice broke. I have carried that night for 11 years, Ethan. I have wondered every day whether I could have done something different, said something different, whether there was some word that would have brought him home too. And tonight, God is my witness, I got to hear his voice again. I got to bring his son home. Do you know what that means to me? Do you have any idea what you gave me tonight? Ethan was crying now silently, the tears running down his face. You knew him, he said. You actually talked to him on his last night. You're the last person who ever heard my dad's voice. I am, Nathan said quietly, and I want you to know something about it, something I've never told anyone because it never seemed like it would matter to anyone. In the last 30 seconds when he knew and we both knew he wasn't going to make it out, he wasn't scared, Ethan. His voice never changed. And the last thing your father said to me, the very last thing before the transmission ended was, "Tell my boy I wasn't afraid. Tell Ethan his daddy wasn't afraid." The room went completely silent. Evelyn Carter made a sound like something breaking and pressed both hands to her mouth. "He said my name," Ethan whispered. "At the end, he said my name." "He said your name," Nathan confirmed, his own voice barely holding. "I've been carrying that message for 11 years, son. I never knew how to deliver it. I didn't even know how to find you. And then tonight, out of the entire sky, out of every airplane over that ocean, it was you. It was you in that seat. So I'm delivering it now. Your father's last words were about you. He wanted you to know he wasn't afraid. And I have to believe that somehow he knew. Somehow he knew that one day his boy would need to hear that his daddy faced the end without fear so that his boy could do the same thing. And tonight you did. You faced it exactly like he did, without blinking." Ethan lowered the phone from his ear for a moment because he could not hold it steady, and his grandmother took him in her arms and the two of them held each other and wept. An old woman and a boy, 11 years of grief finally finding its bottom, finally reaching the place where the pain turns into something else, something that can be lived with, something almost like peace. When Ethan could speak again, he lifted the phone back to his ear. "Nathan," he said, "will you, when things settle down, when all of this is over, will you come and meet us? In person, I want to shake your hand. I want my grandmother to meet the man who was with my father at the end, and with me tonight. I want—" His voice caught. "I don't have a lot of family. It's just me and Grandma. And I think after tonight you're kind of part of it now, whether you want to be or not." There was a long silence on the line. "Son," Nathan Shaw finally said, and he was weeping openly now, this veteran controller, this man of iron calm. "I would be more honored by that than by anything else in my entire life. I'll be there. You try and stop me. I'll be there." They said their goodbyes, and Ethan handed the phone back to Megan. And for a moment the room was quiet, full of a feeling too large for words. And then the world came for them the way the world always does. The next hours were a blur. There were investigators, kind but thorough, who took Ethan through every moment of the flight and who grew more astonished with every answer, because the more they understood exactly what he had done, the more impossible it became to believe an 18-year-old had done it. There was the airline's leadership flown in and roused from their beds, who did not yet know whether to treat Ethan as a hero or a liability, a public relations miracle or a legal catastrophe, until the chief pilot of the entire airline, a silver-haired veteran named Captain Diane Ruiz, sat down across from Ethan and asked him to walk her through the engine fire, and listened to his answer, and then sat back and said to the whole room, "Whatever else happens here, understand this. This young man executed a single-engine approach and a maximum crosswind landing in a wide-body aircraft that he was never trained to fly, and he did it correctly step by step, under the worst conditions I have ever heard described. I have 22,000 hours. I am not certain I could have done what he did tonight. This is not a liability. This is the finest piece of emergency airmanship I have encountered in 30 years, and this airline is going to say so publicly and loudly." And there was the press held back, at first, then finally allowed a single brief statement, and Ethan stood in front of the cameras with his grandmother beside him and Megan on his other side. And he did not give them the story. They wanted the story of a boy genius, a prodigy, a miracle. He gave them something better. "My name is Ethan Carter," he said, his voice quiet but steady, the lights flashing in his eyes. "Tonight, 2 of the finest pilots in the world got sick and couldn't fly, and I was the only person on board who could try. I want everyone to know that I was not alone up there. There was a controller named Nathan Shaw who never left my side. There was a flight attendant named Megan Collins who held 200 people together and never lost her nerve. There was a passenger named Gus who kept the cockpit safe. There were 200 people who prayed and stayed calm and gave me the space to do my job. He paused. And there was my father, Captain Marcus Carter. He flew for this airline. He died over this same ocean 11 years ago, saving 180 people. Everything I did tonight I did, because he spent his whole life becoming a man who ran toward the people who needed him, and I spent my whole life trying to be like him. I'm not a hero, I'm just his son, and tonight I finally understood what it meant to be that. The room was silent. And then softly at first, and then not softly at all, the assembled reporters, hardened people who had covered 1,000 tragedies, began to applaud, and some of them were crying. And the story that went out into the world that night was not the story of a prodigy or a scandal. It was the story of a father and a son, and a legacy carried across 11 years in one dark ocean. And it moved something in millions of people who read it, because everyone understands what it is to want to be worthy of someone they have lost. Richard Hale's version of events never had a chance. By the time he was released from questioning, the truth was already everywhere the truth, as 200 witnesses had lived it, and there was no story he could tell that could stand against it. Within days, the passenger video began to surface phone footage from inside the cabin, and there he was for the whole world to see, mocking the boy before the emergency, blocking the cockpit during it being hauled back to his seat. The board of his company met in emergency session. His largest clients issued statements distancing themselves. The invitations stopped coming. The doors that had always opened for Richard Hale all his life began one by one to close. But here is the part of the story that surprised everyone, the twist that no one saw coming, least of all Richard Hale himself. Because 3 weeks after Flight 106, a letter arrived at Evelyn Carter's home, handwritten, and it was from Richard. Ethan almost didn't open it. He almost threw it away. But his grandmother stopped him. "Read it," she said. "Not for him. For you. You never know what a person carries until you let them set it down." And so Ethan read it. And it was not what he expected. It was not an excuse. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was, of all things, a confession. Richard wrote that he had been a cruel man for his entire life, and that he had known it somewhere, and had never once cared because cruelty had never cost him anything. He wrote that he had grown up poor and frightened, and had promised himself he would never be powerless again, and that somewhere along the way, protecting himself had turned into stepping on everyone beneath him, and he had stopped being able to see the people he stepped on as people at all. He wrote that when he looked at Ethan on that airplane, he had not seen a boy. He had seen a threat to a worldview he had built his whole identity on, the belief that people like Ethan did not matter, and that if that belief was wrong, then everything Richard had ever done to climb was wrong too, and he had not been able to face that, so he had attacked the boy instead. And then he wrote the part that made Ethan put the letter down and stare at the wall for a long time. He wrote that on the airplane in the last minutes when he had bowed his head and heard the old woman singing and had wept. He had done something he had not done since he was a small boy. He had prayed, and he had not prayed to be saved. He had prayed for the first time in his life to be different. And then, the boy he had despised had carried him down out of the sky and set his worthless life gently on the ground. And Richard had walked off that airplane understanding that he had been given something he did not deserve by someone he had wronged, and that he had exactly one thing he could do with the rest of his life that would mean anything at all, which was to try, however late, to become a man worth the second chance he had been given. The letter ended simply. "I know you owe me nothing. I know an apology cannot reach across what I did to you and to your father's memory. I am not asking for forgiveness because I have not earned the right to ask for anything. I am only telling you that you did not just save my life on that airplane. You showed me in the most humiliating and undeniable way possible exactly what a man is supposed to be and exactly what I had failed to be. I am 71 years old and I am starting over. I do not expect to get very far, but I will spend whatever time I have left trying to be a person your father would not have been ashamed to have saved. Thank you, Ethan Carter. Thank you for my life, and thank you for the mirror. I needed both." Ethan folded the letter carefully and set it down. "Well," his grandmother asked, "he says he's going to try to be different." Ethan said slowly. He says I showed him what a man's supposed to be. Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. And do you believe him? Ethan thought about it for a long time. I don't know, he finally said. Maybe he means it right now tonight with the shame still fresh. Maybe in a year he's the same man he always was. I can't know that, Grandma. Nobody can. He looked up. But I know it doesn't matter what he does with it, because I know what I'm going to do with it. I'm not going to carry him around inside me. I'm not going to spend one more minute of my life angry at a man who spent his whole life smaller than I'll ever be. Dad wouldn't have. Dad would have saved him and let him go and never thought about him again. So that's what I'm going to do. I saved him. And now I'm letting him go. And his grandmother looked at him with tears standing in her eyes, and she said, Now you sound exactly like your father. That's the last piece, baby. That's the part that makes a Carter, not the flying, the letting go. The two pilots survived. The captain's heart was repaired and he walked out of the hospital 9 days later, and the first thing he did before he went home to his own family was ask to meet the boy who had saved his life. And when he met Ethan, this veteran captain of 30 years, took the boy's hand in both of his, and he could not speak for a full minute, and when he finally could, all he said was, You have the airline in your bones, son. When you're old enough, when you've got the hours, you come see me. I will personally see to it that you get every chance to wear these wings, because the sky needs Carters in it. It always has. And Ethan did. Years later he did, but that is a story for another day. For now, on a quiet evening, a month after the night that changed everything, Ethan Carter sat with his grandmother on the porch of their small house, and the sun was going down, and somewhere far overhead, faint and high, an airliner was crossing the sky, its contrail catching the last of the light, carrying a few hundred strangers towards somewhere they needed to be, all of them trusting, without ever thinking about it, the people up front to bring them home. Ethan watched it go. You thinking about him? Evelyn asked. Always, Ethan said, and then he smiled a real smile, the first fully unguarded smile his grandmother had seen on him in 11 years. But it's different now. It used to hurt. Thinking about him used to be like pressing on a bruise. Now it feels like... He searched for the words. Now it feels like he's up there. Like every time a plane crosses the sky, that's him still flying, still bringing people home. And now I'm part of it. Now there's two of us up there in a way, him and me. And someday it'll just be me carrying it forward, and then someday somebody else. He shook his head. I finally understand what you always told me, that he didn't leave. He just changed how he stays. Evelyn Carter reached over and took her grandson's hand. This hand that had held 200 lives steady over a black ocean. This hand that had her son's steadiness in it and her husband's before that, and she held it, and she watched the airplane disappear into the gathering dark, and she was at long last, after 11 years of grief, completely at peace, because she understood something now that she had only hoped before, that a good man does not truly die as long as someone he shaped keeps living the way he taught them to live, that Marcus Carter was not gone, not really, not while his son sat on this porch with his steadiness and his courage and his refusal to turn back, that the boy the world had looked through, the boy in seat 14C, the boy a rich man had mocked for holding a pilot's manual, had turned out to be the truest thing in that entire airplane, the one person aboard who was exactly, completely, magnificently who he appeared to be underneath, if only anyone had bothered to look. They had not looked. And then, for one impossible night, they had been forced to, and they had seen. Ethan Carter was 18 years old. He had a private pilot's license and a worn backpack full of aviation manuals, and a grandmother who loved him, and a father who had never truly left him. He had saved 200 lives with his bare hands over the middle of an ocean that had tried to take everything from him and failed. And he had learned the one thing his father had spent his whole life trying to teach him without ever getting the chance to say it out loud. That you do not fly for the easy days, that you get ready long before the sky ever breaks for exactly who you are going to be when it does, and that a Carter, when everything is on the line and 200 souls are screaming and there is nobody left to save them, does not flinch, does not turn back, and does not ever, ever stay in his seat. He stands up, he walks to the cockpit, and he brings them home.